He didn't know, because there was no way he could know, that his time here was limited. Very limited. That he was in fact breathing his last breaths here on earth. Living the last moments of his just barely 27 years of life here on this planet. He didn't know, as he was out with friends celebrating his birthday, that he was being watched, that he was being followed. He was being stalked. Stalked and observed while he was celebrating. Stalked and observed by a group of killers, a group of conspirators who were now executing a very premeditated plot that had been hatched and birthed days before. A plot that had been hatched between them with every single one of their collective evil intentions directed into one common purpose, one common goal: the premeditated murder of Charles Jones. This group's collective hatred and animosity, which drove the conspiracy that existed between them, this evil and despicably wicked conspiracy. He didn't know that now all of their planning, all of their surveillance, all of their advanced coordination was now coming to fruition. Coming into fruition in such a precise way that he only saw his killers for mere seconds as they rapidly closed in on him, dressed from head to toe in all black, like ninjas coming out of the dark. Disguises that included balaclavas and ski masks. Disguises that these conspirators had decided well before this moment that they were going to wear, to use to hide their identities from the ever-present and ubiquitous cameras that permeate our culture. As Charles Jones sat there in the front passenger seat of his Dodge Charger, their plan came perfectly together. He was now the perfect target, caught completely, entirely off guard, completely blindsided. As these gunmen appeared, seemingly, you will see in this evidence, out of nowhere. A perfectly planned ambush, and there's no other way to say it. The evidence will show you clearly this was an ambush, a designed ambush, one that they had carefully planned and now were orchestrating. Unable to run, unable to dive or even duck, basically caged in the front seat of his car. He was basically a sitting duck. And these killers, they didn't hesitate, not for 1 second and not for one moment. They moved rapidly into their pre-planned positions, into their firing locations. And then they immediately unleashed a hellish onslaught, affecting a precisely coordinated violence of action, sending a barrage, a wall of hot lead, crashing into the only barriers between Charles Jones living and Charles Jones dying. Those barriers, the automotive glass, the sheet metal of the front of his Dodge Charger, which were absolutely no match for the high-powered 5.56 and 300 blackout caliber rifle rounds, which were now traveling at him, directed at him at thousands of feet per second, each one of them carrying over 1,200 foot-pounds of energy, directed specifically at Charles Jones. A Glock 9mm handgun was being utilized by one of these conspirators, a handgun that wasn't just a semi-automatic handgun. It had been converted to a fully automatic hand cannon, and now it was running wide open, dumping all 30 rounds of its magazine through the front end and the windshield of that Dodge Charger. All of that gunfire filling the dark early morning hours with booming concussions and bright flashing muzzle flashes as these high-pressured and high-powered rounds flooded the atmosphere in front of that Dodge Charger. Charles Jones. You've heard his name in the indictment. That's his face. Just a few seconds of the mountain of evidence that you will see in this case of what happened that night. Evidence that will show you clearly that these co-conspirators hatched this murderous plot not minutes, not hours, but days before this, formulating in their hearts and minds this agreed upon collective and confederated plan with one common agreed upon goal: death, violence, and murder. A conspiracy motivated and hatched days before, hundreds of miles away from Tampa. A conspiracy that would span through those days and over 500 miles of travel. Reservations were made, uniforms, disguises obtained and selected. Gear was obtained, weapons selected, weapons loaded, and weapons modified and made ready. Transportation was obtained, vehicles with specific purposes, and a plot that required advanced planning and logistics to include housing, communications, and transport would materialize and become reality. A criminal, murderous operation. These co-conspirators leaving their homes in the northeast corner of this state, traveling here, traveling to their target. Conspiring to murder Charles Jones, not in his home, not in Jacksonville, not on his home territory, not at his residence, but here in Tampa, while he was on a birthday trip, while his guard was down. And you will see in this evidence the clock-like precision of these co-conspirators, how they worked together as a team in this team effort. Principles. This is a law that you heard a little bit about. You'll be instructed on it at the end of this case after the evidence is given to you by the Honorable Judge Sisko. She will instruct you on the law of principles as well as the law on murder and all the other laws that you will need to render your verdict in this case. The law of principles, if a defendant helps another person to commit or attempt to commit a crime, that defendant is a principal and must be treated as if they had done all the things that the other person or persons did, if we prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, that they first intended that the crime occur and did some act or said something, anything, that was intended to and that did incite their co-defendants to commit this murder, cause them to, simply encourage them to, assist them, or advise other persons to actually commit that crime. Now, incite, cause, encourage, assist, or advise the other person to actually commit or commit the crime. For first-degree premeditated murder, we must prove that this defendant intended that Charles Jones be killed. It is not necessary for the principal to know every detail of how a first-degree murder will be committed as long as they intend that it occur. And they did some act or said something that was intended to help or did help the murder to occur. But almost more importantly, the principal, the defendant, does not have to be present when the crime is committed or attempted to be committed. But in this case, folks, you will hear that this defendant, Alica Andrews, was right there, driving right next to that Dodge Charger in the seconds before this murder happened. If the defendant is found by you to be a principal, then she is legally responsible and accountable for everything that her co-conspirators, her co-defendants did. Alica Andrews, these are her co-conspirators. I don't know if this laser is going to work, if you can see. In the upper left-hand corner, that's Rashad Murphy. Lower left, Davion Murphy. Sean Gathright is in the upper right. And in the lower right is her boyfriend at the time, Isaiah Chance. These were the 5 conspirators. This was the assault team that took out Charles Jones, that took his life, that snatched it from him in the early morning hours of June 23rd. Isaiah Chance, Sean Gathright, Rashad Murphy, Davion Murphy. To understand the murderous intent that existed amongst them, and to understand this conspiracy that dwelled in all of their minds and hearts, we have to go back and look at the lives and associations of Charles Jones and these defendants. What did Charles Jones do to these defendants that was so bad that would cause them to confederate, to conspire, engage in this coordinated, planned attack? Charles Jones belonged to and was affiliated with a group known as 6 Block. He was a member of that organization. It exists in Jacksonville. It's known as 6 Block, and it is a street gang. It consists of several members. 2 other gangs in Jacksonville, ATK and 1200, were affiliated gangs. They despise 6 Block. They detest them. They abhor them. And the level of hate between these groups is a mutual hatred. The evidence will show that these gangs have been at war for several years And when I say war, the evidence will show you this is a war going on in the streets of Jacksonville. The hatred and the dripping animosity of these defendants towards Charles Jones, it ran deep. And the evidence will show you that. In fact, you will hear that in October of 2023, just 9 months before this, before the murder of Charles Jones, he had left his residence in Jacksonville in that same black Charger about 6 o'clock in the morning. He came to a stop sign in his neighborhood, just a few blocks from his house, when a shooter with a high-powered rifle opened fire on his car, striking his car several times and striking him in his lower leg, spraying bullets all over that neighborhood. Mr. Jones at that time was able to drive himself to a local hospital, receive treatment, and be released. That bullet, or fragment of bullet, remained in his leg until it was removed by the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy on his body here in Tampa after his murder. Earlier that same morning, a member of ATK, a man by the name of Tilly, was shot and killed at a high school football game. This shooting of Charles Jones was clearly retaliation, but Charles Jones was not the shooter of Tilly. But that didn't matter. So why was he targeted? You won't hear any evidence to suggest that he had anything to do with that shooting. He was affiliated with 6 Block. And you're going to hear in the evidence that he wasn't just a member of 6 Block, he was a notorious member of 6 Block. Probably the most well-known member of that gang. In fact, he was the public face of 6 Block. The spokesperson, basically. He posted on social media, but most notoriously and notably, he wasn't just a spokesperson for 6 Block, he was a certified celebrity. Charles Jones had millions of followers on social media, if not tens of millions of followers, because he engaged in an activity that you heard a little bit about yesterday from one of your fellow jurors, and he was spot on. That's exactly what the evidence is going to show you in this case. This long-standing pattern of what is called drill rap. And it is an activity that Charles Jones embraced and that he engaged in under the name Julio Foolio, which was in fact his street name, Foolio. Julio Foolio. In this type of rap music, it's not just rap, it's disrespect. It's making fun of and disparaging not only ATK and 1200, the opposing gangs, but disparaging their members by name. Disparaging, and probably most incendiary you will find in the evidence, bragging about the death or deaths of other ATK 1200 members who have been murdered. As I said earlier, make no doubt about it, this is a gang war. Mr. Jones, you will see in the evidence, not only produced this music, he produced music videos. Videos where he would travel to the gravesides of these individuals, or a graveside that was used in lieu of their graveside, and do things during the video like lay on their graves and sing around their graves and use sarcastic lyrics in his songs, pour champagne on their graves, rubbing it in the faces of ATK and 1200. And ATK and 1200 were no better. They did the same thing. You're going to see videos from members of that gang. One young man in particular, Kenyatta Bullard, known on the streets as Young and Ace, who produced not only songs about 6 Block members who had been murdered, in the days after the murder of Charles Jones, he produced a song just within almost 48 hours and put it up, talking about the murder of Charles Jones, the specific facts of it. This created in those 5 individuals, in their minds and in their hearts, a vendetta. This was revenge. Because he ridiculed them, and he ridiculed their gang, which was their family. He ridiculed their friends, which were their family members. They were close, deep running bonds of loyalty in this organization. Because they have each other and they defend each other. They defend not only each other, but they defend each other's honors. And they defend their affiliations.